The Galactic Council chamber hummed with chatter and light-hearted banter as representatives from hundreds of star systems gathered. It was a rare occasion when humor broke through the stiff protocols and bureaucratic droning of interstellar politics. Today, however, was different. Today, the galaxy laughed. In the center of the chamber, beneath a shimmering dome that reflected constellations, stood Ambassador David Cole, the first human ever admitted into the council. Despite his well-tailored diplomatic suit and carefully rehearsed posture, he looked distinctly uncomfortable. At the podium stood King Zorth of the Creel Dominion, a towering reptilian monarch clad in gold-plated armor and silken robes. His scales shimmered under the chamber lights, but his slit-pupiled eyes betrayed thinly veiled irritation. "I, King Zorth of Creel," he announced in his thunderous voice, "hereby bestow upon the Terran ambassador my most prized treasure." Laughter rippled through the chamber, though no one dared to laugh too loudly. The Creel were not known for their sense of humor. "Behold!" Zorth gestured dramatically, and the doors behind him slid open with a hiss. Out stepped a figure, draped in flowing golden silk. She was tall, easily matching David's 6-foot frame, but undeniably alien. Her skin had a bluish hue. Her eyes glowed faintly, and delicate patterns of bioluminescent markings adorned her cheeks. "This," Zorth continued, voice dripping with sarcasm, "is my daughter, Princess Zalera." The chamber erupted in whispers. David barely kept his jaw from hitting the floor. "A diplomatic gift," Zorth added. "I trust the Terrans will treat her with the respect she deserves." David's mind raced. This wasn't diplomacy. It was a scandal. He'd read enough about Creel customs to know what was happening. The king was publicly discarding his daughter, and by gifting her to an alien, he ensured no Creel male would ever take her back. Chapter 2. The Princess Problem. "Ambassador Cole, you can't refuse this," hissed the human counselor back on Earth's holographic feed. David paced his quarters on the council ship, the view of stars swirling outside, doing nothing to calm his nerves. "But she's a person, not property," he snapped. "Not to the Creel," the counselor replied. "Rejecting her would mean rejecting the Creel entirely, and we can't afford to lose their trade routes." A knock interrupted them. David turned to find Zalera standing at the door, looking regal and composed despite her circumstances. "I can hear you, you know," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. David hung up the call. "Princess." "Zalera," she corrected. "Let's not pretend you want this arrangement any more than I do." Her voice was melodic, but tinged with sharpness. "I didn't ask for this," David said. "Neither did I," she replied. "But here we are. The least we can do is not make it worse." David studied her, unsure whether to be impressed by her poise or terrified by the implications. Chapter 3. An Alliance of Misfits. Over the next few weeks, the ship's crew adjusted awkwardly to their new royal passenger. Zalera, however, seemed determined to defy every expectation. Instead of sulking, she studied Terran languages and customs. Instead of demanding luxury, she requested duties aboard the ship, assisting engineers, mediating disputes, and even joining diplomatic negotiations. Rumors spread quickly. The unwanted princess was winning the crew over. David, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. He soon found out he was right. Chapter 4. The Creel's Secrets. One night, Zalera appeared in his quarters, her bioluminescent markings dimmed to a soft glow. "We need to talk," she said. "What's wrong?" "My father didn't send me away just to get rid of me," she said. "He sent me away to hide me." David blinked. "Hide you? From what?" "From my brother." The words hit like a hammer. The Creel heir, Prince Sereth, was rumored to be ruthless. Stories of his rise to power were steeped in bloodshed. "He doesn't want competition," Zalera continued. "And as long as I'm alive, I'm a threat to his claim." David sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "And now I'm involved in a Creel power struggle? You already were the moment you accepted me," Zalera said. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Chapter 5. The Galactic Joke Ends. The next council session saw Zora standing smugly, while David prepared to speak. "I would like to address the matter of Princess Zalera," David began, his voice steady. "Contrary to popular belief, the Terran Alliance does not treat diplomatic guests as trophies." Gasps rippled through the chamber. In fact, Princess Zalera is not just a guest. She's an advisor, an ambassador in her own right. Zalera stepped forward, her commanding presence silencing the room. "I claim my right," she declared, "as heir to the Creel throne under Article 72 of the Interstellar Treaty." Zortha's face twisted in rage, but the council murmured in agreement. The law was clear. "And the Terran Alliance," David added, "fully supports her claim." The council chamber erupted, not in laughter this time, but in chaos. Chapter 6. The Rise of a Queen. What followed was a whirlwind of negotiations, battles of words and wits, and an attempted assassination thwarted by Zalera herself. By the time the dust settled, Zalera had proven her worth, not just as a princess, but as a queen in waiting. David, meanwhile, earned respect from allies and enemies alike, turning what had started as a galactic joke into a strategic masterstroke. Epilogue. Partners in diplomacy. Months later, as David stood beside Zalera at her coronation, he couldn't help but smile. "Not bad for an unwanted daughter," she teased. "And not bad for a human who inherited her," he replied. The galaxy might have laughed once, but now they watched in awe as Zalera ascended the throne, with humanity by her side. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated faintly through the floor as Ambassador David Cole sat in his quarters, staring at the holographic interface hovering above his desk. Multiple reports and political briefings blinked on the screens, but his attention remained fixed on the live feed of the Galactic Council's news network. His inheritance had made headlines across the galaxy. Creel King Dason's daughter. Terran ambassador left holding the crown. Galactic joke or galactic coup. Human ambassador given alien bride. Creel politics or an act of desperation. David closed the feed with a sigh. It wasn't just the media. Diplomats and political rivals from across the council had flooded his inbox with messages, some mocking, some probing for weaknesses. Humanity's reputation as a serious player in interstellar politics hung by a thread. The chime of his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called out. The door slid open to reveal Princess Zalera. She stepped inside without hesitation, her bioluminescent markings glowing faintly in the dim light. Her golden silk gown had been replaced with a more practical outfit, dark trousers and a tunic, both fitted with metallic accents that shimmered like armor. "You need to change the access codes," she said, her tone sharp. "Your security is laughable." David raised an eyebrow. "Good evening to you too, Princess." "Zalera," she corrected for the second time since they'd met. "Let's skip the formalities." David gestured to the chair across from him. "Fine. Have a seat." She remained standing. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I need to know where I stand." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. David rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Where you stand. As far as the council is concerned, you're a diplomatic guest." "No," she interrupted. "Where do I stand with you? Because right now, it looks like you don't know what to do with me." David paused, taken aback by her bluntness. "You're right," he admitted. "I don't." Zalera's expression softened slightly. She crossed her arms but didn't press him. "I didn't ask for this," David continued. "I didn't ask for any of it. Being humanity's ambassador, joining the council, and certainly not being handed a princess like some kind of trophy." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I wanted this? To be paraded in front of the galaxy like a bargaining chip?" "No," David said, his voice gentler now. "I don't." Zalera exhaled and finally sank into the chair. "For what it's worth," David added, "I don't see you as property, and I don't plan to treat you like it." "Good," she said, "because I'm not." David leaned back, folding his arms. So what now? We survive, she said simply. Together. Her words surprised him, but before he could respond, his communicator beeped. It was an encrypted call from Earth Central Command. David hesitated, then turned to Zalera. You should stay, he said. She tilted her head. Why? Because this involves you now. Zalera's eyes flashed with curiosity, but she stayed silent as David accepted the call. The hologram of Earth's lead diplomat appeared, his expression as tense as ever. Cole, he began, we have a problem. David almost laughed. Just one? The diplomat ignored him. Intelligence reports indicate the Creel Prince, Sereth, is mobilizing his fleets. Rumors suggest he's consolidating power now that Zalera is out of the picture. David shot a glance at Zalera, whose face remained carefully neutral. Meaning what? David asked. Meaning the Creel throne is unstable, and you're sitting next to the only other heir. David's blood ran cold. She's not safe, and neither are you, the diplomat continued. If Sereth sees her as a threat, and we're certain he does, he won't hesitate to come after her. David looked at Zalera. Her glowing eyes betrayed no fear, only a steely determination. Understood, David said. We'll take precautions. Good, the diplomat said, because the Creel aren't known for subtlety. Expect trouble. The call ended, leaving the room unervingly quiet. Zalera leaned back in her chair, finally breaking the silence. Well, she said, it seems I'm more valuable than you thought. David allowed himself a small smile. And more dangerous, a new alliance. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The crew doubled their security protocols, and David assigned Zalera a personal detail of human guards, though she seemed less than impressed. I can protect myself, she insisted during a training session where she easily disarmed one of the guards. David wasn't so sure. He'd seen firsthand how brutal Creel politics could be, and Sereth's reputation was no exception. But Zalera refused to hide. Instead, she immersed herself in Terran customs, surprising the crew with her quick adaptability. She sparred with soldiers, studied diplomacy, and even assisted with ship repairs, earning the crew's respect. David found himself both impressed and frustrated. She was bold, sharp, and stubborn, qualities that made her invaluable as an ally but exhausting as a guest. You're not what I expected, he admitted one evening as they reviewed council reports together. Zalera arched an eyebrow. What did you expect? Someone helpless, he said. Someone afraid. She laughed, a rare sound that caught him off guard. If I were either of those things, I'd be dead already. David looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the royal poise and alien beauty was someone who had fought to survive her entire life. He exhaled slowly. All right, Zalera, he said. We'll survive this. Together. She smiled, faintly this time. Good, she said, because I'm not going back. The lights in the command center dimmed as holographic displays flickered to life, casting a bluish glow over the room. Ambassador David Cole leaned over the table, analyzing the rotating projection of the Creel Dominion's fleet movements. The patterns were unmistakable. Prince Sereth was consolidating forces along trade routes, cutting off supplies and communications. They're not just posturing, David said, his voice tight. They're preparing for war. Across the table, Princess Zalera studied the projection with an expression carved from stone. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed faintly, as if mirroring her thoughts. It's worse than you think, she said at last. David looked up. Explain. Zalera tapped the hologram, zooming in on a cluster of Creel ships forming a blockade near the Orion Arm. This fleet isn't designed for conquest, she said. It's designed for capture. Sereth isn't here to destroy me. He's here to take me back alive. The room fell silent. Why would he risk that? David asked. You're exiled. You've lost your claim to the throne. Zalera's eyes flicked to his. You don't understand Creel politics. My exile was meant to humiliate me, yes, but it wasn't permanent. Sereth knows that if I return, I can challenge his rule. As long as I'm alive, I'm a threat. David clenched his jaw. So he won't stop until he gets you. Correct, she said. And he'll burn this ship to ashes to do it, preparing for the storm. David turned to the tactical officer. How soon can we move? 2 hours, the officer replied. We're still refueling. Make it 1, David ordered. I want us out of this sector before their scouts pick up our trail. The officer saluted and left the room, leaving David and Zalera alone. You're awfully calm about this, David said, watching her. Zalera crossed her arms. I'm Creel. We're trained to face death without fear. David smirked. Good, because fear's not going to help us right now. He walked to the control panel and pulled up the ship's internal systems. We need to assume Saratha's agents are already in play. I'm doubling security patrols and locking down all external communications. Zalera stepped closer, her presence commanding even in the confined space. You're making a mistake. David turned. Excuse me? If you act like prey, they'll treat you like prey, she said. Running won't save us. So what do you suggest? Fight, she said simply. Send a message. Show them humanity isn't afraid. David studied her for a long moment. You really think we can win a direct fight with the Creel? Zalera's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. No, but we can make them bleed. The battle begins. Hours later, the ship emerged from hyperspace into the dense, asteroid-filled region of the Orion Nebula. The crew scrambled to prepare defenses as automated drones deployed along the perimeter. David stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays flash red as enemy ships appeared on the radar. They're here, the navigator reported. A massive Creel warship loomed in the distance, flanked by smaller escort vessels. Zalera stepped onto the bridge, clad in combat armor that gleamed like molten gold. Her presence seemed to steady the crew. You ready for this? David asked. Zalera drew a curved blade from her belt, its edge glowing faintly with energy. Always. The first shots came seconds later. Plasma bolts lit up the nebula, exploding against the asteroid field and forcing the human ship to weave through the debris. David gripped the console. Evasive maneuvers. Return fire. Cannons roared to life, sending bright streaks of energy back toward the Creel ships. The battle quickly devolved into chaos, ships twisting and firing in every direction. Zalera moved with purpose, barking orders to the defense teams and directing fire to vulnerable points on the enemy vessels. Her knowledge of Creel tactics turned the tide, and within minutes, one of the escort ships crumbled in a fiery explosion. David couldn't help but feel a spark of admiration. She's good, his tactical officer muttered. She's better than good, David replied. She's a survivor. Betrayal. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, alarms blared across the ship. Intruders on deck 4, a voice shouted over the comms. David and Zalera exchanged a look. Go, David said. I'll handle the bridge. Zalera didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the armory, grabbing a pulse rifle before disappearing down the corridor. The firefight below deck was brutal. Creel soldiers, clad in dark armor, moved with lethal precision. Zalera cut through them with a mix of gunfire and blade work, her glowing markings turning her into a blur of light and motion. But then she saw him, Seraph. He stood at the end of the corridor, his golden armor polished to perfection. His eyes burned with triumph. Sister, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You've caused quite a mess. Zalera tightened her grip on her blade. Not nearly as much as I'm about to. They clashed, the sound of metal ringing through the hall. Saratha's strength was overwhelming, but Zalera fought with the desperation of someone who refused to lose again. The turning point. Up on the bridge, David watched as the Creel warship began to break formation. The human crew had outmaneuvered their attackers, forcing them into retreat, but it wasn't over yet. Commander, a voice called out. The princess. She's still fighting below deck. David didn't hesitate. Hold position, he ordered. I'm going after her. He grabbed a weapon and raced toward the lower levels, dodging debris and fallen soldiers. When he arrived, Zalera was locked in combat with Seraph, their blades sparking with each strike. David raised his rifle and fired. The shot clipped Serapha's shoulder, forcing him to stumble back. "Get out of here," Zalera shouted. "Not without you," David yelled. Firing again, Sarah snarled but retreated, vanishing into the shadows as his remaining forces fell back. Breathing heavily, Zalera turned to David. "You should have left me." "Not a chance," David replied. "We're in this together, remember?" For the first time, Zalera's icy demeanor cracked, and she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Aftermath. The Creel fleet withdrew, but the threat remained. Seraph would return, and both David and Zalera knew it. As the ship sailed back towards safer space, David glanced at Zalera. "You're stuck with us now," he said. "I think," she replied, "you're stuck with me?" And for the first time, David didn't mind.